Assalamu alaikum. Very good afternoon, my dear students. And today we are going to talk about this topic, which is in front of you: translation of culturally bound expressions and problems and strategies. Uh, basically, this topic is based on these two articles, as you already know. Number one is problems encountered in translating cultural expressions from Arabic into English. Number two, strategies for translating idioms from Arabic into English and vice versa. So I have combined or extracted the important points from these two articles and combined them in this title: culturally bound expressions, the translation of culturally bound expressions. And I have discussed basically two things: problems and strategies. And the examples that shall be discussed are Arabic into English and vice versa. Uh, we are going to discuss basically 5 points in this lecture. Number one is, what do we mean by culturally bound expressions? A term which is very prevalent in the literature of translation studies. Point number two, problems. What are the major problems, especially the problems identified in the survey or in the study that was conducted in the first article? And then the proposed or suggested strategies to solve these problems, or to find out some kind of solutions for these problems. And then there are concluding remarks about the whole situation, about the whole topic. And then number five is an important note uh, that is related to our turning point in this course. Okay, culturally bound expressions. In the literature, in the books, you will find these terms as well: cultural expressions, cultural terms, or culture specific items, or maybe cultural words, or cultural phrases, or cultural sentences, or cultural elements. So you will, when we read in the writings of translation scholars, we find that these terms are used for the phenomenon culturally bound expressions. By the way, what do we mean by the culturally bound expressions? We can say that the words, phrases, or sentences that carry the cultural elements of that particular language are considered culturally bound expressions or cultural items. We can also understand culturally bound expressions by the categorization that have been offered by Newmark, very famous translation scholar and theorist. And he has divided basically the culturally bound expressions into five major categories. Number one is ecology, number two is material culture, number three is social culture, number four, organizations, customs, activities, procedures, and concepts, and number five is gestures and habit. In the ecology is further subdivided into flora, fauna, hills, winds, plains, and so on and so forth. Material culture, of course, is a wider term that contain food, clothes, houses, towns, transport. And then social culture is work and leisure. And then the category number four, the examples are the organizations: the political organization, the administrative organizations, the religious organizations, the artistic organizations, and then the customs of each organization, activities that are carried out by each organization, procedures that are used in each organization, and then the concepts or the philosophies uh, uh, you know owned by each organization, political or administrative or religious or artistic. And the category number five is the gestures and habits. we don't need to be worried about these categorization, because the culturally bound expressions can be categorized in a different ways. New marks category is mostly used in the research articles for the sake of studying these cultural items, and of course discussing the problems of translating these cultural items from one language into another. We can also say that any culturally bound expressions, the kinds are these proverbs is one major kinds, because the proverbs carry the deep experiences of that particular society, or idioms they are also represent a very rich experience of the cultural experience of that language. And also the collocations means the التلازمات اللفظية, that one word should follow the next, or the followed by the next, as we say give and take, as we say in Arabic al-akhz wal-ata. And metaphors is a very wide range of culturally bound expressions, and couple of other kinds can also be mentioned here. But the point is basic concept that should be clear in our mind while we are discussing culturally bound expressions, that that item, that term, that lexical item, that word, that phrase, that sentence, carries the properties which are very distinct and very unique to that culture. And when we try to translate these things, words, sentences, phrases, into other language, we find that the experiences of the target language, the cultural background of the target language is such that it is not so easy to translate such expressions or terms or words to to that language. Okay, this is the concept or meaning of culturally bound expression. With this, we can go to the next point in this lecture: uh, problems. The writers of the first article, they have identified four major problems for translating culturally bound expressions from Arabic into English, and I think the vice versa would also be the same. Uh, and these are the four problems identified by them. Number one is unfamiliarity with cultural expressions. Number two, failure to achieve the equivalent in target language. Number three is ambiguity of some cultural expressions. Number four, lack of knowledge of translation techniques and strategies. And familiarity with the cultural expressions, of course, that indicate to to the educational part, where or the where the students, where the translators are not familiar with the cultural expressions, that they don't know the background or the details that are associated with that particular culturally bound expression. So because they are unfamiliar, because they know very little about the cultural expression, so they find it very difficult, and they take it with its surface meaning, and they find it difficult to translate into the target culture or target language. This unfamiliarity is twofold: is unfamiliarity with the source culturally bound expression, or with the target culturally bound expression. Both, it could be both ways. Failure to achieve the equivalent in target language is another problem faced by the translators, that they fail to achieve the equivalent in target. Actually, this problem is not related to culturally bound expression, because the question of equivalent is not easy question. Creating or equivalent meaning or equivalent effect, as Naida has discussed, is not an easy job even in the common words. But when the translators are translating culturally bound expressions, the problems, of course, usually enhances, and translators find it more difficult to achieve that equivalent in TL. But here, what do we mean by failure to achieve the equivalent in TL? That maybe one phrase in the Arabic language or one culturally bound expression in Arabic language is translated. Let's take the example of tayammum, the religious culture, which represent the religious culture of Islamic culture, and tayammum. It is almost, which is very clear that the translator would fail definitely to find an equivalent in the target language. Tayammum, because the concept of tayammum does not exist in the culture of the target language, in this case is English, or even in the case of Urdu, or even in the cases historically in the case of other languages, because the concept is, as I said, the word, the concept carries religious culture, cultural properties that are very particular, that are very peculiar, specific to that culture. So usually the translators, fail to find the equivalent in the target language. And the problem number three, I'm sorry, is ambiguity of some cultural expressions. Sometimes the expressions, the cultural expressions, they are so ambiguous, and that the translation of these expressions become a challenge for the translators. Number four, which is very much prominent and maybe the most dominating problem, is the lack of knowledge of translation technique and strategies. Of course, if this study found that the most dominant uh, problem is this one, the lack of knowledge of translation techniques and strategies. That means there is a remedy, there is a solution that can be solved. This can be solved to some extent, of course, with training, with education, and of course with more practice. As for the problems, we have some examples here, and the one for the first example is النساء المتزوجات بعقد صحيح والمفترقات عن أزواجهن بعد الخلوة بالطلاق بعد الخلوة بالطلاق أو الفسخ عدتهن 3 أشهر إذا كن بلغن الإياس. We are focusing on the translation of idda here, although there are other culturally bound expressions, religious cultures, al-khulwa wa al-talaq, or even al-fasakh. These four words can be discussed, but we have taken only idda. If idda is translated with this grace period, or idda is can be translated with waiting period, or 3 months pause. You see this. This can be number two, failure to achieve the equivalent in TL, because again the concept is unique in the source culture, religious concept. So the solution, the better solution could be here that we find within the bracket, that we take the word as it is, idda, but then with also with a note, explanatory note, where we explain what does this idda means. The next example that we can discuss here to understand the problems: البحث الجنائي أماط البحث الجنائي اللثام أمس عن أخطر العصابات المتخصصة في سرقات السيارات في الأردن. So our focus is on البحث الجنائي. فالبحث الجنائي, if it is translated with this, the forensic police, the policemen, the criminal police or police department, whereas actually this term is specific to the criminal investigation department. And with this example we can say the the lack of knowledge of the translation techniques and strategies, because here the translators were supposed to, of course, search the term that is used, or the translation of that term used in English language. So they were supposed to use that translation technique for the sake of finding correct translation. Another example is this one: تشير الدراسات إلى أن الأردن يشهد وفق الإحصائيات الرسمية حوالي 25 جريمة شرف سنويا. And our culturally born expression here is جريمة شرف. جريمة شرف is both religious and legal, represent the religious plus legal cultures here. And if it is translated with this dignity crimes, murder, of course cases related to adultery and crimes of passion and sharaf crimes, we would be of course making mistake, or these translations would not be transferring the concept of source culturally bound expression, because it is a term which is used in the media as well, used in the law, which is used in the Islamic law as well. So honor killing crimes, jarimatu sharafin, and because the equivalent is made, and equivalent is available in the other language, in the target language. So again the same could be said about this, that is the lack of knowledge of translation techniques and strategies, because here the translator could work hard to find out the meaning or the correct equivalent used in the target language. Another example is the أوردت الصحف أن الجندي البريطاني قتل بنيران صديقة. أو أوردت الصحف أن الجندي البريطاني قتل بنيران صديقة. There is a repetition, but take this قتل بنيران صديقة. Niran is plural of nar, and sadiqa is of course feminine of sadiq, min sadaqa, from the word sadaqa, which means friendship. And the see the translation by the coalition forces. Biniran Sadiqa is translated by the coalition forces, by a British soldier, by his girlfriend. And I think here we think the translators thought that it is not Sadiqa, it is Sadiqihi or Sadiqa, and he could just guess the meaning and translate it in this way, or by a friend of his, whereas the correct translation is by a friendly fire. And we can see that the problem here again can be traced back to one of these reasons, maybe partially related to lack of knowledge of translation techniques and strategy, or unfamiliarity with cultural expressions. These two reasons can be, or problems can be, associated with this mistake, this one. Okay, now we can also take an example from English into Arabic to understand these problems. The three sheets to the wind. Now, three sheets to the wind is a idiom or idiomatic phrase used in English, and the background is, or the meaning, it of course, three sheets to the wind. Not every word is giving the literal meaning. Everything is not denotative, it's connotative, as we can see that, and the explanation is in front of you. The sheet is the line that controls the sails on a ship. If the line is not secured, the sail flops in the wind and the ship loses headway and control. If all three sails are, of course, lost, the or lose, the ship is out of control. So this is the background of these words. But this idiomatic phrase is used for a person who, because has are is drunk and taken too much wine, has become sukran or mahmoor, and has become out of control because of this. So the symbol has been taken from of course the sailing of ships, but has been used for the person who is, and it represent of course the cultural meanings of the English language. And if we try to translate this literally and say salasu awraqin lirrihi, I think that means we are unfamiliar with the cultural expressions. We we didn't work hard to go to the background of that and find the meaning, or we don't have the orientation or training, which of course pushed us to the understanding of these culturally bound expressions. And so this unfamiliarity caused this mistake. Another example is golf window. No, the golf window. If we take this idiom the literal meaning is golf is a game, which is it's a game for the elite people, those people who have much time to play that game. It takes a lot of time, and also of course a lot of resources are required for playing this game anyways. But the golf widow is the one who is whose husband has died. But the all the literal meanings are not meant here. So the golf widow is the woman whose husband frequently leaves her alone while he plays golf or spend times with friends. So this is the connotative meaning of golf road, not the literal meaning, not the denotative meaning, not the dictionary meanings. So if the translators say armalatul golf, as we say, the possibility is that people would go to the literal translation or literal meaning of the word, and they say armalatul golf. But I think we need to understand as translators that what is the background. We need to make ourselves familiar, and we also need to of course enhance our translation techniques. So al-mar'a, we can say al-mar'atul muhmala, we can say al-mar'atul wahida, we can say al-mar'atu al-mu'allaqa. So uh, it one of these, or we can also kind another phrase which can give the meaning of this idiomatic phrase in a better way. And then of course we can also have discussion, because al-mar'atul muhmala, in my personal view, is near to the golf widow. But al-mar'atul wahida, perhaps it's not, it's not, it does not carry most of the properties of golf widow. But al-mar'atul mu'allaqa, it carries the cultural, religious culture of Islamic culture. um, in Quran it has been mentioned al-mu'allaqa, the woman which is not uh, husband giving no attention to the wife who has been fatazaruha kal mu'allaqa, and left in a situation where, although she is wife of a person, but the husband is not paying attention to her. With this, we can move on to the third point of our lecture: strategies. Uh, in this presentation, we can discuss these five strategies. Number one is finding cultural equivalent. Number two, functional translation. Number three, paraphrasing. Number four, glossing. And number five, borrowing. Remember, my dear student, when we talk about the strategies or procedures or steps to to translate culturally bound expressions, or even to translate other things, in general, a lot of strategies have been suggested by the scholars, and we can of course get benefit from all these strategies or some of these strategies, because the relevance of these strategies is based on some other factors, most importantly language pair, because if the language, of the culture of source language and the target language is such that they have not so much interaction, you need different strategies. But if the culture or the history of both source and the target language says that they have, cognate languages, they have lived together, or they have had very good historical relations with each other, they were give and take took place. So the maybe different pattern of strategies become relevant in that situation. Anyways, here we are going to discuss these five strategies, cultural equivalent. Of course, here, is finding the cultural equivalent in the target language, such as translating this it rains cats and dogs. This is very, it's a idiomatic phrases. It rains cats and dogs. And we have uh, near to equivalent or equivalent idiomatic phrase here in Arabic, and we say إنها تمطر كأفواه القرب. It also gives almost same effect or same image or same concept. But if we translate this, it rains cats and dogs with this inha tumtiru kitatan wa kilaban. I think the recipient culture, the audience or the readers would get it with a strange uh, concept. I'm holding myself because in the theory of translation, there is a lot of discussion on that. Should we translate this with this cultural equivalent, or the literal translation is better in this case? There are pros and cons, and there are of course arguments against and for of these two point of views. But I think this is not the right time. We can discuss them in a later stages, some other times in some other lecture. The second technique that can be used is functional translation, where the translator uses words or phrases that have the same function in the source language. Same function. What is the function of hello when we say in English to the people? So what is the function? What are the phrases that play the same function? So we find in the Arabic Muslim culture, we find that the Assalamu alaikum is the function. Here we are not seeing the word. We are not, of course, paying attention to the meanings of the word, or the Assalamu alaikum, as we can say, is literally it means, and this is what we mean when we say Assalamu alaikum. It means that peace be on you, that don't worry, I'm all peace for you, I'm not dangerous for you, and you will get all the good things from my side. But here the translator can of course rely on the function. What is the function? We say Assalamu alaikum. And of course, there are arguments in the favor of this kind of translation as well in some situation. where of course you see when we meet people, usually we say assalamu alaikum, we say assalamu alaikum, how are you, we say assalamu alaikum, kayf al hal. I think we don't mean the real meaning of assalamu alaikum. We just find a situation and fill the situation with this assalamu alaikum, and this phrase fill this function. There is a situation required by some the situation which requires some phrases to be used, and we say assalamu alaikum. In heart, in our mind, we do not mean the meaning that are embedded in assalamu alaikum. So this could be one of the strategies for finding a solution, translating culturally born expression. Number three is paraphrasing. In the paraphrasing, translator explains the meaning of the word, or or paraphrase, such as translating the word thesaurus, English word thesaurus, by one word, and it has been paraphrased with the explanation, but not explanation of the word. The words, translated words, are explaining the source word. معجم الألفاظ المترادفة والمتضادة thesaurus, where we find that the antonyms, synonyms, and antonyms are there. The dictionary of antonyms, and this is what thesaurus exactly mean. Okay, there is another strategy which is glossing, and of course, the glossing is, when you rub something to polish it to make it clear. Translator gives additional information in a footnote or within the text to explain the cultural word or expression, such as explaining the Arabic word az-zakat within bracket or in a footnote under, uh, can be used depending upon the length. If the explanation, additional information is longer, I think better it should be given in the footnote, or if it is not so long, one sentence or two small sentences, and these can be given within the bracket. Again, it depends on the situation, on the requirement. If you are translating a, you know an article, a research article, are you translating a book, are you translating a small paragraph, and so on and so forth. So different situations requires different uh, techniques. Borrowing, translator borrows from the source language the word or phrase and Arabicize it or Englishize, such as translating internet by internet, or the word salah by salah. It is no more, usually it is not explained because it has become so famous, because it was borrowed sometime, and in the beginning it was kind of glossing, where it was borrowed with the explanation, with the with of course giving more information about salah. But now in the Islamic literature, or the literature that is related to the Muslim society or the Arab society, one way or the other, and produced in English language, the word Salah is now known concept, has become a known concept. Means the word has been, borrowed from Arabic into English, and has become a kind of, essential part. As we see the internet on the other side, we don't need to give the additional information about internet, or we don't need to say that, the internet is the combination of net www dot and this all, you know and information related to the concept. So these we have, I just want to, scan these strategies once again: cultural equivalent, functional translation, paraphrasing, glossing, and borrowing. Remember one thing before I move forward. Here we are not learning, in this course we are not learning how to translate culturally bound expressions. We are just discussing because we want to enhance our understanding about the culturally bound expressions, and the probable or suggested strategies to transfer these culturally bound expressions into the target language. This is the main objective of these two articles, and we want to discuss these things very quickly because this is not the main objective of this course. I shall explain it after some time. In the concluding remarks, we can find out the solutions for the whole situation with these suggestions. More courses on SLTL cultures, more courses on SLTL cultures, extended readings in SLTL cultures, solutions on part of the translators, on part of the departments, those who are offering translation courses. Number one, of course, is related to the department. Number two is related to the translators, of course, because they are required to do that. Number three, which is perhaps more relevant and required, is practice on techniques or strategies of translating culturally bound expression, because practice makes the man perfect. So with the practice, this problem can be solved. But again, uh, one fact should be very clear. These strategies are not fixed strategies, as I said, point number one. As I said, there are other, strategies that are available uh, in the literature, translation studies. This should be very clear. Number two, not every strategy or procedure is perfect with every situation. For example, you say Assalamu alaikum. Hello can be translated with Assalamu alaikum, not all the time. Or even that it rains cats and food, you cannot say that all the time. It is good to say that innaha tumtiru, let me go there, innaha tumtiru ka afwahil qarab. You cannot say that all the time. This is a good strategy. These are just examples, and what you need is to understand the requirement there, because translation is not an act which is done in an isolation. Translation is a social act. Translation has many stakeholders. Translation is done for a purpose, for an objective. And when we say it's a social act, we are talking about many people, because there is a source language, or the source writers, or the source speakers, and then there is a translator, and then there are people who are going to get benefit, or who are going to use the translation for their own objectives. Publishers, maybe the clients, maybe the readers, maybe the governments, maybe the organizations, maybe. So the translation is not an activity which is done for its own sake. It is done for people, for society at large, and for certain purposes. So using one strategy in one situation is not permanent. So using one strategy in one situation, maybe you use different strategy for the same phrase, for the same idiomatic word, in a different situation differently. I hope this point is very clear. But the last point is that, as I said earlier, because our purpose of discussing these two articles is not to learn the strategies how to translate culturally bound expressions as such. Our purpose is to understand the importance of culturally bound expressions, and the importance of knowing the problems and the strategies of transferring these culturally bound expressions into the target language. I think this point should be very clear in our mind, because this is not a course meant for, for practice or for training or for education. Okay, last point is the important note, which is very, very important, and I would advise you to pay full attention to this point. You see, our next step, so far we have discussed many things. We have discussed concept of culture, its characteristics. We have also discussed the language relationship between language and culture. We have also discussed the relationship between culture and the translation or impact of culture on translation, and we have also discussed some examples in the previous lectures. And in this lecture we have also, it's a kind of continuous topic which we are discussing here. We have discussed, the problems encountered, the problems faced by the translators while they are translating culturally bound expressions, and what are strategies to. Now, after this, we are going to take a different side, although it's also related to the culture. So, because so far we are translating culture's items, done. But after the arrow, the line is very important. And this line should be kept in mind while we move forward in the next lecture is influence of culture and translation. Influence of culture on translating activities, influence of culture on translator, influence of culture on the type of translation that is being done, influence of culture on the process of translating, influence of culture on the product of translation, influence of culture on the function of translation, influence of culture on those stakeholders who are associated with the translation, how they are being influenced by the culture. So the next topics, the coming topics, and we are inshallah we are going to start the next topic in the next coming class. So we find that this distinction between what we have discussed so far, and especially during the previous two lectures, and what we are going to discuss in the subsequent lectures, is a kind of shift that we are taking, is a kind of turn that we are taking, the influence of culture on translation. So with this, here comes your next reading assignment. Of course, I have taken this chapter number 8 from Jeremy Monday's book, Introducing Translation Theories and Practices. Chapter number 8 is with the title of Cultural and Ideological Turns. So we are going to start chapter number 8, but the next reading assignment is this one. You are supposed to read and understand introduction and also translation as rewriting. It's a theory, and before this, translation and gender. So you just read two things, introduction, and also you also read translation as rewriting, and stop reading before this topic, translation and gender. Thank you very much, and see you people in the next class, and of course today as well for discussing your concerns and questions. Allah Hafiz.